Hello, thank you for buying the Ghost EMF detector from Four Bit Industries. This video will show you how to solder this up and use it. So what we have in the package are a PCB, a bunch of resistors, 3 LEDs, capacitor, switch, chip socket, and a potentiometer. So let's start with the resistors. We're going to start with the big pack of 5 resistors. So these resistors, if you look at them carefully, should have a brown stripe, red, red, gold. And that means that they are 1.2K. So everywhere you see on the board that says 1K2, that's where these resistors are going to go. I like to cut my resistors away from the tape. And we can see the first 1K2 spot is just the second resistor down in this long row of resistors. So 1K2 it says there. I'm going to bend my leads, and you'll get the hang of where to bend them the more you do it. I'm just going to go ahead and stick one right in there in the second spot. Now a good trick is to bend your leads out a little bit to hold it in place for soldering. If you have a vise for your PCB, that's great. If you don't, you can use a little bit of blue tape to tape it down to the table so it doesn't move around on you. And then we're going to, with a clean soldering iron, we're going to put a little bit of solder on the tip. We're going to go in and touch the pad and the lead at the same time with the soldering iron. Flow some solder in from the other side. Only takes a couple of seconds per joint. And we've got our first resistor in there. Now I'm going to trim the leads with my cutter. I'm not going to trim so far down that I'm cutting through the solder joint, but that should be fine. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and insert the rest of the 1K2 resistors. You don't have to insert and solder one at a time. If you feel comfortable inserting a whole bunch and then soldering them one after another, that's fine too. So the fourth one down is a 1K2. There's another 1K2 right underneath it. So these are 1.2 kiloohms, but when we write them on boards, we very often use the K as the decimal point, because sometimes decimal points get lost in the silk screening, or if there's a little bit of dirt on the board. Alright, so I've got all 5 in there, and now I can just solder, solder, solder. of these got a little ugly because I wasn't able to get the tip in there very well, so I'm just going to reheat that joint. That looks good. Alrighty, now it's time to move on to some other resistors. So the two resistors that are together are the 47Ks. And it's a little hard to see the colors on there, but it starts with yellow, purple, orange, and then gold. These I want to bend a little further out from the body because they are very small resistors. But one goes there in that gap. And then the other one goes over here. And while we're at it, let's just go ahead and insert the last two. So this one starts with green, green, brown, red, gold. That is the 5.1K or 5K1 resistor. And that goes right here. And then the last one, kind of hard to read, but we've included a blue-bodied metal resistor, metal oxide resistor. That's the 3 megohm resistor. You can faintly see it starts with orange, which is the number 3. And we'll just stick that in the 3 meg spot up top. Alright, now we'll solder all the new ones. So one thing you can do to inspect your solder joints is to flip it over and look at the top part. Did the solder flow into the hole on each of these? If it did, that's good. In fact, if it flows up the lead into the top part and adheres to the top pad, then you've put enough solder and you've gotten the joint hot enough for that to actually bond. So next, I like to do the socket. Now you'll notice there is a notch in one end of the socket. I'll zoom in so you can see that. So you can see there's a little notch in the end of the socket that matches the notch on the footprint. So we're going to want to insert it so that the notches line up. So now it's easy for this to go moving around once you flip it over. I like to go ahead and tape it down. Most people find that that's a a good way to hold it in place. And then I recommend soldering just one pin to start. So we'll solder the first pin, and then we'll look at it again and make sure that it's flat against the board. Just flip it over and inspect underneath that tape. Make sure that it's flat against the board, it's not all cattywampus. You can also feel the pins. Are they all still sticking out? If they are, go ahead and solder the opposite corner. If it's not in the right position, you can just heat up that first joint and move it into position carefully because it will be hot. And after you've got the corners done, you can go ahead and solder the rest of them. It's a little tight, but you shouldn't have any trouble. Ooh. Go. Alrighty. Next we'll do the metal switch, the slide switch. I'm going to slide it down into the off position. Not that it matters yet. Not with the battery not installed. Solder the 3 little pins first. What do we do with the big pins? Well, again, wedge that iron in there and flow plenty of solder in there. That hole will fill in. Alright, just a few more items and then we'll be done. Let's go ahead and put the potentiometer in there. There's only one way the potentiometer goes in because it has 3 leads. We'll take this. Next we'll do the capacitor. This is a ceramic disc capacitor, so it's not polarized. Just like the resistors, you can install it either way around, it doesn't matter. You can bend the leads on the back to hold it in position. Alrighty. So now we're on to the most touchy component, the LEDs. These have to be installed the correct way. If they're installed backwards, they will not light up. You can see red, yellow, and green are written on the PCB, but the LEDs themselves have a polarity, and you can see the polarity is indicated by the long and short lead. But there's a second way to tell the polarity, and that is to feel this rim across the base of the LED. There's a flat spot on it. There's a flat spot on one side next to the short lead. And that flat spot and short lead correspond with the square pad on the board. So you're going to want to stick the long lead through the round hole, the round pad, and the short lead through the square pad. And you'll notice that the flat side of the LED, the rim, is going to match up with that little flat spot on the footprint. And then you can bend the leads out to hold it in position. You're going to do the exact same thing for all three LEDs. Putting that long lead through the round pad and the short one through the square pad. So red, yellow, and green are in position. If they wobble around a little bit, that's not terrible, but if you really want to tape them into place, you can do that. One thing about inserting a bunch of components and then soldering them one after another is that the leads of the ones you've already done can get in the way. So you have to decide what you're most comfortable with. Alright, we've got just a few more things to go. So also in your kit you should have a battery holder, and you should have a little nut and screw. And these get installed a little differently than the other items because we're going to insert the battery holder from the back and solder it on the front. So we recommend installing the screw and nut first. So stick the battery holder through the back, go to the second hole here. These are number 2 screws and nuts, by the way. We find that you really only need one, but if you want to put on 2, you can find some. Very small screws to fit in there. And so installing the screw and nut first lets you know you have that aligned. And then we will come in with our iron. As always, make sure you're touching the pad and the lead. Flow a little bit of solder in there to make a good connection, and then just flow a whole bunch in there until the hole is filled. And that should be good enough. I seem to have slid this around a little bit. I'm just going to heat that up and move that into a better position. Now we'll do the same over here. There. Good bit of solder. And then once that cools, you're going to want to trim these down pretty close so that they don't prick your fingers. We've included 2 bits of wire with your kit. If you want to use longer wire or thicker wire, whatever works for you is fine, but we've included this for completeness sake. What I would do is just insert it from the top and bend it around like that to hold it in place for soldering. You want to insert the stripped end, of course. And once you've got them in there, they can just go straight out to each side. You can experiment with bending them around to see how see if it changes your reception at all. And then we'll just solder these on the bottom. Again, a lot of solder. Make a nice connection. And now we have two final things to do. We need to insert this chip. So I'll zoom in a little bit here. Remember how the PCB had a notch drawn on it, and this socket has a notch in it? That notch should be pointing straight up. Well, you should notice a little notch on your chip too. So we're going to take out the chip, and the legs, you'll notice, are kind of splayed out a little bit. That's the way it comes from the factory. I like to roll mine against the table just a little bit to get those legs pointing straight down. That's a good way to bend them all at once. And so once you have your legs pointing straight down, you can insert it into the socket. Make sure all 14 legs are going into their respective positions. That looks good. It should insert so that you see about that much of the legs still sticking out. You can see there's not much space between the chip and the socket. So now this is off. How do we use this? We'll go ahead and add a battery and turn it on. When you turn it on, you might not see any lights, and that's fine. What you need to do is adjust this for an appropriate sensitivity. So now if you turn the sensitivity adjustment all the way high, all your lights will turn on. And then what you want to do is turn it back until the yellow light just turns off. See, just the green light's on. It's best if you can hold this away from any source of electromagnetic radiation when you're doing that adjustment, because as you can see, as I get close to my video camera, it starts to pick up some sort of EMF coming from the camera and the red light comes on. And that's basically how this works. The strength of the electromagnetic field hitting the antenna is going to turn on these lights in succession. I always turn my sensitivity so that the green light is on and the yellow light is just barely off, and then I know when the yellow light comes on I'm getting close to something, and when the red light comes on it's very strong. And so that's basically the entire usage of this EMF ghost detector.